The call came just as I was scrubbing dried egg yolk off my favorite breakfast plate. My father's name lit up my phone screen for the first time in 15 years, and I nearly dropped the dish into the sink. For a moment, I just stood there, water running over my hands, wondering if this was some kind of cosmic joke. My name is Morgan, and until that moment, I thought I had my life figured out. Sure, my marriage to Sam wasn't perfect, but whose is? And yes, maybe our son Jake hadn't spoken to us in months, but that's what kids do in college, right? They drift away, find themselves. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering. Hello. Morgan. My father's voice was thinner than I remembered, but it still carried that stern edge that used to make me sit up straighter at the dinner table. I need to see you. Walter. I switched off the faucet, wiping my hands on my jeans. Is everything okay? A dry chuckle crackled through the line. No, not really. I'm dying, Morgan. Cancer. Doctors say I've got about 6 months. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. I pulled out a chair and sank into it, my legs weak. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything then. Just come see me. There are things we need to discuss. Things about your mother, about what happened back then. My stomach clenched. That was 15 years ago. We both agreed. No, he cut me off. You agreed. You and that husband of yours. I just watched you walk away. From somewhere upstairs, I heard Sam moving around, probably getting ready for work. His footsteps always seemed heavier lately, like he was carrying some invisible weight. Look, my father continued, his voice softening slightly. I know this isn't fair, but I found something in your mother's old things. A letter. It's about that summer, Morgan. The one before everything fell apart. I closed my eyes, memories threatening to surface. Dad, I can't just. Please. The word hung there, foreign and desperate from a man who'd never begged for anything in his life. I'm at the same house. You remember the address? Of course I do. How could I forget? The white colonial with the crooked mailbox, where my mother had planted roses that never quite took. Where everything had changed. Come today if you can. Alone. He paused, and I could hear him struggling to catch his breath. And Morgan? Don't tell Sam. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, until Sam's footsteps reached the kitchen doorway. Everything okay, honey? His voice was casual, but there was something else there. Something watchful in the way he leaned against the doorframe in his perfectly pressed suit. Wrong number, I said, the lie slipping out easier than it should have. Just some telemarketer. Sam nodded, adjusting his tie. Listen, I've got a late meeting tonight. Don't wait up. Another late meeting. They've been happening more frequently lately. Along with the mysterious phone calls he took in our garage and the receipts I found for restaurants I'd never been to. Sure. I smiled, the expression feeling plastic on my face. I might go visit an old friend anyway. He barely looked at me as he grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before I let myself really think about what I was about to do.
My father was dying.
He had a letter from my mother, and whatever was in it had been important enough to break 15 years of silence. I glanced at the clock, 9:15 a.m. Sam wouldn't be home until late. He'd made that clear. Plenty of time to drive to my childhood home and finally face whatever truth my father needed to share. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just about my father's secrets. It was about Sam's too. And by the end of that day, everything I thought I knew about my life would be turned upside down. The drive to my father's house felt like traveling back in time. Every landmark brought back memories I'd spent years trying to forget. As I pulled into the cracked driveway, I noticed the roses were gone, replaced by overgrown weeds that seemed to be slowly consuming the house itself. My father opened the door before I could knock. The sight of him knocked the wind out of me. The commanding presence I remembered had shrunk into someone I barely recognized, gaunt, pale, with clothes that hung loose on his frame. You look just like your mother, he said, his voice rougher than it had been on the phone. I followed him inside, where time seemed to have stopped 15 years ago. The same faded wallpaper, the same worn furniture, even the same smell of coffee and old books. But there was something else now, the sterile scent of medication and illness. "You should have told me sooner," I said, watching him lower himself carefully into his old armchair. He waved off my concern. "Would you have come?" The question hung between us like smoke. We both knew the answer. "I found this last week," he said, reaching for an envelope on the side table. "Your mother left it in her recipe box. It's dated just before everything happened." My hands trembled as I took it. The envelope was yellowed, my mother's elegant handwriting faded but still clear. "For Morgan, when the truth comes out." "Have you read it?" He shook his head. "Wasn't meant for me. But Morgan, there's something else you need to know. Something about that summer, about why I couldn't help you when Sam—" A sudden coughing fit seized him, violent enough to double him over. I rushed to get him water, finding my way around the kitchen as if I'd never left. When I returned, there was blood on his handkerchief. "How bad is it?" I asked, handing him the glass. "Stage 4. Started in the lungs, spread to the liver." He took a careful sip. "The treatments might buy me a few more months, but they cost more than I have. I had to remortgage the house just to start them." I sat down heavily on the couch. "Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I still owe people money from last time. From when you came to me about Sam's gambling debts." The memory hit me like a slap. Sam, wild-eyed and desperate, confessing he'd lost everything. Me, begging my father for help. The look of disappointment on his face as he wrote the check that would save my marriage but destroy our relationship. "That debt was paid," I said quietly.
No.
He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What I gave Sam that day wasn't mine to give. I borrowed it, Morgan. From people who don't forget. And now they're calling it in." My phone buzzed, a text from Sam. "Where are you? We need to talk about the account." I ignored it, my mind racing. "How much?" "With interest?" "Close to $500,000. The room seemed to tilt. "That's impossible. Sam told me he paid you back within a year." My father's laugh was bitter. "Is that what he told you? Read your mother's letter, Morgan. She knew things about Sam, things she tried to warn me about before she died. I didn't listen then, but maybe you will now." Another text from Sam. "Seriously, where are you?" "The bank called." I stared at the envelope in my hands, remembering Sam's late meeting tonight, all the unexplained absences, the way money seemed to disappear from our accounts lately. "There's something else," my father said, his voice growing weaker. "The people I borrowed from? They've been watching Sam. They say he's in trouble again, deeper than before. And this time, he's dragged someone else into it." My blood ran cold. "Who?"
Jake.
"Your son came to see me last month. He was asking questions about Sam's business partners. Said he'd found something in Sam's office that scared him." The third text from Sam came just as my father finished speaking. "The police were just here. Don't go home." I looked up from my phone to meet my father's knowing gaze. Whatever was in my mother's letter, whatever Sam had done, one thing was clear: the life I'd built on 15 years of silence was about to come crashing down. And somewhere in the middle of it all was my son, walking into the same trap that had snared me all those years ago. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside Jake's apartment near campus, my mother's unopened letter burning a hole in my purse, watching shadows move behind his window. My phone had exploded with messages from Sam, each one more desperate than the last. But it was the single text from Jake that kept me frozen in place. "Don't trust Dad. Don't tell him you're coming to see me." When Jake finally emerged from his building, he looked older somehow, his shoulders tight with tension. He spotted my car immediately, as if he'd been expecting me. "We can't talk here," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. "There's a diner about 20 minutes away. Follow my directions." The Jake I knew would have hugged me, would have had 1,000 questions about why I was there. This Jake stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Your grandfather told me you visited him," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Yeah, well, someone had to look into what Dad's been doing." He glanced at his phone, then turned it off completely. "Did you know he's been using my social security number?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? Turn left here. Jake's voice was flat. He opened accounts in my name. Credit cards, loans. I found the paperwork in his office when I was home last month. That's why I went to see Grandpa Walter. I thought maybe he knew something about Dad's business partners. The diner appeared ahead, a neon oasis in the growing dark. Inside, Jake chose a booth far from the windows. He looked exhausted up close, with dark circles under his eyes that reminded me too much of his father. How bad is it? Asked after the waitress brought us coffee. Jake pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. See for yourself. The documents inside told a story that made my stomach turn. Credit applications, bank statements, loan documents, all in Jake's name, all signed with perfect forgeries of his signature. The amounts were staggering. There's more, Jake said, his voice finally cracking. I followed Dad last week. He met with these guys. They didn't look like regular businessmen. One of them mentioned something about collection methods if the payments didn't come through. A memory surfaced. Sam's split lip and bruised ribs 15 years ago, his shaking hands as he begged me to ask my father for money. History wasn't just repeating itself, it was escalating. Why didn't you come to me? I asked. Jake's laugh was bitter. Like you came to me about Grandpa being sick? Or about whatever happened 15 years ago that tore the family apart. We don't talk about real things in our family, Mom. We just pretend everything's fine until it explodes. Before I could respond, Jake's phone, which he'd turned back on, buzzed with a text. The color drained from his face as he read it. Dad knows I have the documents, he said. He's at my apartment right now. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach.
How?
My roommate must have told him. Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it hurt to watch. Mom, there's something else. I found another set of papers in Dad's office. Letters from someone named Claire. They're not just business letters. The name hit me like a physical blow.
Claire.
The woman Sam had almost left me for before everything fell apart 15 years ago. The reason we'd needed my father's money in the first place. My phone lit up with a new message from Sam. I know Jake showed you the papers. We can fix this. Like we fixed it last time. Just come home and we'll talk. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the weight of secrets crushing him just like they'd crushed me at his age. I thought about my mother's letter, still unread, about my dying father and his unpaid debts, about all the lies I'd told myself to keep my marriage intact. No, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. We're not fixing it this time. We're ending it. Jake's eyes widened. What are you going to do? I pulled out my mother's letter, finally ready to read it. First, we're going to learn the truth. All of it. Then we're going to make your father face what he's done. To all of us. What I didn't tell Jake was that I'd seen a business card fall from his folder. Detective Laura Bennett, Financial Crimes Division. My son had already started down a path that would either save us or destroy us all. My mother's handwriting blurred as I read her letter for the third time, sitting in my father's kitchen while Jake paced and Walter dozed in his chair. The truth she'd tried to warn us about 15 years ago was worse than I'd imagined. Sam hadn't just been gambling back then. He'd been laundering money for the same people who were now threatening our son. We need to go to the police, Jake said, stopping by the window. Detective Bennett already has a file on Dad's activities. I folded the letter carefully. It's not that simple. If we report him, these people will come after all of us, including your grandfather. They're already coming after us. Jake's voice cracked. Look what they made Dad do to me. Using my identity, forging my signature. He's destroyed my credit, my future. A knock at the door made us all freeze. Walter stirred in his chair, suddenly alert despite his medication. Jake moved away from the window, and I saw fear flash across his face. It's Sam, he whispered. His car's outside. Before I could stop him, Walter was pushing himself up, moving toward the door with surprising speed. When he opened it, Sam stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. Morgan. His voice was soft, reasonable, the voice he used when closing deals. We need to talk.
No.
The word came out stronger than I expected. Whatever you're going to say, the answer is no. He stepped inside anyway, his eyes taking in Jake's presence, the letter in my hands, Walter's defensive stance. You don't understand. I had to do it. They were going to take everything. Like you took everything from me? Jake moved forward, but I caught his arm. Did you think I wouldn't find out about the loans? About Claire? Sam's face went white at the name. You've been in my office. Someone had to look for the truth. Jake shot back. Mom wouldn't. Grandpa couldn't. So I did. The truth? Sam laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. You want the truth? Fine. I made mistakes. But everything I did to protect this family. To give you the life you deserved. By stealing my identity? Jake pulled away from me. By threatening Grandpa? I never threatened. No. Walter cut in, his voice steady despite his weakness. You just sent your business associates to do it for you. Like you did 15 years ago. Sam turned to me, his eyes pleading. Morgan, please. We can fix this. I have a plan. One last deal that will set everything right. Like the last deal? I opened my mother's letter. The one that got Kevin Martinez killed? The name hung in the air like smoke. Sam's face went from white to gray. How did you? He started. Mom knew, I said quietly. She wrote it all down before she died. How you convinced Kevin to help you move money through his restaurant. How he threatened to go to the police when he found out where the money came from. How he disappeared 3 days later. That wasn't me, Sam whispered, but his hands were shaking. I didn't know they would. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw 2 men in dark suits approaching the house. Sam's business associates, right on schedule. Jake, I said, keeping my voice steady, take your grandfather to the back room.
Now.
Morgan. Sam reached for me, but I stepped back. You have 2 choices, I said, pulling out Detective Bennett's card. Either you tell these men you're done, that you're going to the police and taking whatever deal they offer, or I make the call right now. They'll kill me, he said. Maybe. I met his eyes. But if you don't choose, they'll kill all of us, including your son. The knock came, heavy and insistent. Sam looked at the door, then at me, then at the hallway where Jake had disappeared with Walter. 25 years of marriage, and I finally saw him clearly, a man trapped by his own lies, desperate to maintain control even as everything crumbled. Time's up, I said, holding up my phone. What's it going to be? The knocking grew louder, and Sam made his choice. But it wasn't the one any of us expected. Sam opened the door before I could stop him. The 2 men pushed past him into Walter's house like they owned it, their expensive suits a stark contrast to the worn furniture and faded walls. I recognized one of them from photos in my mother's letter. Marcus Chin, the man who'd visited Kevin Martinez the night he disappeared. Family reunion? Marcus smiled, but his eyes were cold. How touching. The other man closed the door, positioning himself in front of it. Sam stood between them and me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I can explain everything. No need, Marcus said. We already know about the detective, about the evidence your son collected, about the letter. He looked at me. Your mother was quite thorough, wasn't she, Mrs. Flynn? A crash from the back room made everyone turn. Jake appeared in the hallway, supporting Walter, who looked even paler than before. Get out of my house, Walter wheezed, but the effort sent him into another coughing fit. Dad, please, I started, but Marcus cut me off. Actually, this works out perfectly. Everyone who needs to hear this is right here. He pulled out his phone, showing us a video. My stomach dropped as I recognized Detective Bennett entering a building. Your detective friend? She had an unfortunate accident an hour ago. Nothing fatal, we're not monsters. But she'll be indisposed for a while. Jake took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. Don't. Smart woman, Marcus nodded. Now, here's what's going to happen. Sam's going to finish what he started. One more transaction, clean and simple. Jake's identity is already in place for the accounts.
No.
The word came out before I could stop it. Marcus's smile widened. No? Maybe I should show you another video. This one's from 15 years ago. Kevin Martinez's last night at his restaurant. Sam, you remember that night, don't you? Sam's face went ashen. You said you deleted that. Insurance, Marcus shrugged. Like the new evidence we have about Walter's involvement in covering up certain financial irregularities. Prison's not kind to sick old men. I felt the weight of Detective Bennett's card in my pocket, now useless. My mother's letter seemed to burn where I'd tucked it into my waistband. She'd known this might happen, had tried to warn us about the web Sam was weaving. How much? I asked. Mom, no. Jake started. $5 million, Marcus said. Through the account Sam set up in Jake's name. Clean, untraceable. Or we start sending videos to the police. First Kevin's, then some interesting footage of Walter from back in the day. Maybe even that security tape from Sam's office showing Jake stealing documents. The second man moved away from the door, pulling out papers. Everything's ready. Just needs the right signatures. I looked at my family, Jake, his youth already marked by our mistakes. Walter, dying but still trying to protect us. Sam, trapped in a prison of his own making. 25 years of choices, lies, and compromises had led us here. Then I remembered something else from my mother's letter. A safety deposit box key, taped to the last page. What if I could offer you something better than money? Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Mom, what are you doing? Jake whispered. I pulled out my phone, bringing up a photo I'd taken of one particular page from my mother's letter. Kevin Martinez kept records. Everything about your operation, going back 30 years.
My mother found them before she died.
They're in a safety deposit box. Marcus's smile faltered for the first time. You're bluffing. Am I? Why do you think she wrote that letter? Why do you think Sam's been so desperate to find it? I looked at my husband, seeing the recognition dawn in his eyes. That's what you were really looking for all these years, wasn't it? Sam nodded slowly, finally understanding. The records. They destroy everything. Here's my offer, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Leave my family alone. All of us, including Sam. In return, those records stay buried. Marcus studied me for a long moment, and if we refuse? I held up my phone. Then every news outlet in the country gets these photos in the next 5 minutes. I may go down, but I'll take you with me. The silence that followed was deafening. In it, I heard my mother's voice from the letter. Sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to risk everything. Marcus made his choice. But this time, we were ready for it. Marcus's choice came in the form of a single nod to his partner. Before any of us could react, the second man grabbed Jake, pressing something against his back. The implied threat was clear. The safety deposit box, Marcus said calmly.
Now.
My bluff had failed. Worse, I'd put Jake in danger. Sam stepped forward, but Marcus raised a hand. Stay where you are, or your son learns exactly how his namesake Uncle Jimmy died. The color drained from Sam's face. You said. I say lots of things, Sam. Like how I said your family would be protected if you played along. Marcus turned to me. The key, Mrs. Flynn. Don't make me ask again. Walter struggled to stand straighter. Morgan, don't. Shut up, old man, Marcus snapped. Your daughter's going to make the right choice. Just like she did 15 years ago when she chose to keep quiet about Kevin Martinez. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You knew? All this time. You knew I saw what happened. Of course we knew. Why do you think Sam married you so quickly afterward? We needed insurance that you'd keep quiet. Marcus smiled. Sam played his part perfectly. Didn't you, Sam? I looked at my husband. Really looked at him. 25 years of marriage, and I finally saw the truth in his eyes. It wasn't real. Any of it. Morgan, please, Sam's voice cracked. It started that way, but... The key, Marcus interrupted. Or should we discuss this family's history in front of Jake? Jake struggled against his captor. Mom, don't give them anything. Whatever it is, it's not worth. The man holding him tightened his grip, and Jake's words cut off in a gasp of pain. My mother's letter had warned me about this moment. When they come, she'd written, they'll try to take everything. Don't let them take your soul, too. I pulled out the safety deposit box key, watching Marcus's eyes light up with triumph. But as I held it out, Walter suddenly lurched forward, knocking into the man holding Jake. In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. Jake broke free, stumbling toward me. Walter collapsed, his breathing ragged. And through the window, I caught a flash of red and blue lights. Marcus saw them too. His face twisted with rage as he grabbed the key from my hand. You called them? No, I said, helping Walter into a chair. But I knew someone would. Sam stepped between Marcus and me. It's over. The police are here. You're right, Marcus said softly. Then he pulled out a gun. It is over. The front door burst open, and Detective Bennett appeared, arm in a sling but eyes fierce. Drop it, Marcus. More officers poured in behind her. Marcus looked at the key in his hand, then at me. You know what's funny? The box is empty. Has been for years. Your mother moved everything to a digital file before she died. He smiled one last time. Check your email, Mrs. Flynn. I'm sure it's fascinating reading. As the police took Marcus and his partner into custody, I opened my phone with trembling hands. There it was, an email from my mother, dated to be delivered today. 15 years of secrets, waiting to destroy what was left of my family. Mom? Jake's voice was small, uncertain. What does he mean about Dad marrying you? About Uncle Jimmy? I looked at Sam, who stood defeated by the window. At Walter, who couldn't meet my eyes. At Detective Bennett, who watched me with something like pity. The truth, I said finally, is that our whole life has been built on lies. And now we have to decide what to do with them. My phone felt heavy in my hand, my mother's email unopened. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you the bars of your cage more clearly. But as I stood there in my father's house, surrounded by the wreckage of 25 years of deception, I realized something. The only way forward was through the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I opened the email and began to read. Detective Bennett sat across from me in the station's interview room, my mother's email printed out between us. Outside, I could hear Sam being processed, his voice carrying that same smooth confidence he'd used to lie to me for 25 years. Your mother was thorough, Bennett said, tapping the papers. Bank records, photographs, recordings, everything we need to put Marcus away for life. And Sam. What about Jimmy? I asked. Sam's brother? Bennett's expression softened. The file confirms what Marcus implied. Jimmy Flynn didn't die in a car accident. He was killed after threatening to expose their operation. Sam knew. He's always known. A knock at the door interrupted us. Jake stood there, looking older than his 21 years. They're ready for Mom's statement. Wait, I said as Bennett started to rise. There's something else you need to see. I pulled out my phone, showing them the text I'd received an hour ago from an unknown number. Meet me at Kevin's old restaurant. Come alone, or Sam takes the fall for everything. See. Claire, Jake said. Dad's old girlfriend? Bennett frowned. We haven't been able to locate her. She disappeared right after Kevin Martinez's murder. Because she never left, I said. She's been working with Marcus this whole time. The affair with Sam, the threats, everything, it was all part of their plan. Mom, no. Jake grabbed my arm. You can't meet her. She's the only one who knows where the original evidence is, I said. Without it, Marcus's lawyers will tear this case apart. Sam will walk free, and everything we've been through will mean nothing. Bennett studied me. You're not going alone. Yes, I am. I stood up. Claire won't show if she suspects anything. And I need answers about Sam, about why my mother trusted her with those records. At least we're a wire, Bennett insisted. I shook my head. No recordings. No backup. Just me and the truth. The restaurant was dark when I arrived, its windows boarded up since Kevin's death. Claire stood in the shadows of the entrance, barely changed from the photos in my mother's file. You figured it out, she said as I approached. Faster than we expected.
We.
She smiled. Your mother and I. We've been planning this for 15 years. The world tilted sideways. What? Why do you think she kept such detailed records? Why did she wait until now to reveal everything? Claire stepped closer. She knew what Sam was, what Marcus had done to Kevin. We worked together, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. You were my mother's informant, I whispered. Someone had to protect you. Your mother knew she was dying, knew Sam would never let you go willingly. So we created a trail, knowing someday you'd follow it. The affair with Sam was a way to get close, to gain Marcus's trust.
Claire pulled out a USB drive.
Everything's here, the original files, recordings of Marcus confessing to Jimmy's murder, proof of Sam's involvement from the beginning. Your mother called it her insurance policy. I reached for the drive, but Claire held it back. First, you need to decide, what kind of justice are you looking for? What do you mean? Sam's looking at 20 years minimum. But with this? She held up the drive. He'll never see daylight again. Is that what you want? For Jake to lose his father forever? I thought about Sam's lies, about Jake's pain, about my mother's years of silent preparation, about revenge versus justice, and the thin line between them. I want the truth, I said finally. All of it. Whatever that means for Sam, for all of us. Claire nodded, handing over the drive. Your mother would be proud. She always said you were stronger than you knew. As I took the drive, police lights suddenly flooded the restaurant. Bennett's voice rang out. Claire Anderson, you're under arrest. I looked at Claire in shock, but she was smiling. Did you really think I'd let you come alone? Some truths need witnesses, Morgan. That's what your mother taught me. As Bennett's team moved in, I clutched the drive containing 15 years of carefully gathered truth. Sam's fate, Jake's future, my mother's final justice. All of it resting in my hands. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. 6 months after Sam's arrest, I sat beside Walter's hospital bed, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Jake dozed in a chair nearby, research papers spread across his lap. He'd transferred to a local college to be closer to us, though he insisted it was just for better internship opportunities. The USB drive from Claire had changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of using all the evidence, I'd made a different choice. I gave prosecutors enough to convict Marcus and his organization, but held back the worst of Sam's involvement. 10 years instead of life. A chance for redemption instead of destruction. You're thinking too loud, Walter mumbled, his eyes fluttering open. Just wondering if I made the right choice, I said softly. About Sam? He squeezed my hand weakly. You chose mercy. That's never wrong. Jake stirred, looking up from his papers. Grandpa's right. Dad's letters from prison. He's different now. Actually talking about things, not just manipulating. The latest letter sat in my purse unopened. Sam wrote every week, each envelope containing a piece of truth he'd never shared before. Small confessions, genuine regrets, memories of moments when our love had been real despite its fraudulent beginnings. Claire's testimony at the sentencing, Jake continued, about how Mom planned everything. I keep thinking about that. How she protected us even after she was gone. She protected you, Walter corrected. Morgan was just the weapon she chose. A knock at the door interrupted us. Detective Bennett stood there, holding a familiar-looking envelope. This came to the station today. From Claire's personal effects. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before, my mother and Claire sitting in Kevin's restaurant, both smiling. On the back, my mother's handwriting. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of revenge. There's something else, Bennett said, pulling out a document. Claire's confession. She admitted to killing Kevin Martinez herself to protect your mother. He wasn't just threatening to expose the operation, he was threatening to reveal your mother's role as an informant. The truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. My mother hadn't just been gathering evidence, she'd been protecting her own secrets, her own sins. The perfect justice I'd been seeking had never existed. What are you going to do? Jake asked. I looked at the confession, then at Walter's tired face, at Jake's concerned eyes. Nothing, I said finally. Some truths don't need to be told. Some debts don't need to be collected. Walter nodded, understanding in his gaze. Like mother, like daughter. Speaking of debts, Bennett added, Marcus's assets have been seized. The court awarded restitution to his victims, including the money Walter borrowed 15 years ago. Jake sat up straighter. So the house is yours, Bennett smiled at Walter. Free and clear. Walter's eyes filled with tears. I never thought. I did, I said, squeezing his hand. Mom did too. That's why she kept fighting. Later that evening, as Jake drove us home from the hospital, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Are you going to visit Dad? Soon, I said, watching the familiar streets pass by. When I'm ready to hear the whole truth. When we're both ready to build something real from all these lies. At home, I finally opened Sam's latest letter. Inside was a single sentence. I loved you most when I deserved you least. I thought about my mother's final message, about Claire's sacrifice, about Walter's forgiveness and Jake's resilience, about how revenge and justice sometimes look exactly like mercy. Tomorrow I would visit Sam, not to condemn or forgive, but to understand, to see if anything true could grow in the space between revenge and redemption. But tonight, I sat on my father's porch with my son, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors my mother would have loved. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the fight, but in choosing which battles to let go. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough.